After 7 years, Hellblade 2 is finally here. After recently playing the first game, I was pretty excited to get my hands on the long-awaited sequel. I just 100% completed the game and wanted to share my thoughts on Hellblade 2. Let me start things off by saying the graphics in Hellblade 2 are absolutely gorgeous. When the first game came out all the way back in 2017, the graphics were amazing then and honestly still hold up to this day. Hellblade 2 takes that bar they set back in 2017 and raised it even higher. When you think of what a AAA game should look like, Hellblade 2 is the perfect example of it. Moving past the phenomenal graphics, let me move on to the combat. In my last video, I had mentioned how the combat was my least favorite part about the first Hellblade. This was mainly because of enemies seeming to try to constantly get behind me to attack me when I couldn't see them, forcing me to rely on Senua's voices to warn me of incoming attacks. The problem with that was that I didn't always get alerted for incoming attacks, which ended up in me getting randomly hit in the back, all because the enemy wanted a quick little cheap shot. Luckily, this isn't an issue in Hellblade 2, however, that doesn't mean that the combat is now much better than it was in the previous game. I'd actually go as far to say that the combat in Hellblade 2 is worse than it was in the first game. For starters, all of your movements feel much heavier and clunky, mostly with the dodging. I know a lot of people prefer to try to parry attacks rather than dodging, and Hellblade 2 does allow you to parry. However, for someone like me who prefers to dodge and rarely parries, the dodging in this game feels like you're trying to dodge attacks while you're in a dream. Dodging in Hellblade 2 overall feels very slow, heavy, and clunky, making it just feel bad altogether. The combat is also just as basic as it was in the first game. You have a heavy and light attack, a block and parry, and then eventually the ability to focus, which slows time and allows you to usually take out an enemy without giving them a chance to hit you back. In the first game, to ramp up some difficulty, they would throw multiple enemies at you at once. However, in Hellblade 2, you don't really ever fight multiple enemies at once. Instead, enemies are kind of just thrown at you one by one, which eventually makes the combat feel super repetitive and honestly get kind of boring pretty quickly. Moving past the very lackluster combat, I want to focus a little on something that I think was really well done and should honestly be adopted by most, if not every game that implements a feature like this. The feature I'm referring to is the photo mode. Hellblade 2's photo mode is absolutely incredible and is probably the absolute best photo mode I've ever come across in a game. The photo mode in Hellblade 2 not only lets you go into it at any point during your playthrough, but also goes as far to let you adjust several parts of the scene you're trying to capture. You can adjust the direction Senua is facing, her height, even moving her around to a specific area in the scene that she's not currently at. Not only does Hellblade 2's photo mode allow you to adjust the location and direction of Senua, but it also allows you to add extra light sources to help you perfectly capture whatever kind of picture you're going for. The photo mode in Hellblade 2 is so incredibly well done, and I know it's not something that everyone uses or will use. However, if a photo mode is going to be added to a game, it should definitely be done in a way that is very similar to Hellblade 2. Moving past the incredible photo mode, I wanted to touch a little on the puzzles in the game. In the first game, the puzzles were very well done, and some of them I actually found myself getting somewhat stuck on for a short period of time. The first game nailed that perfect balance of challenging, but not so hard that it's frustrating to do. The puzzles in Hellblade 2 are unfortunately pretty underwhelming and miss that perfect balance that they previously achieved. The puzzles in Hellblade 2 are a little too easy and obvious, and more so just feel like something to pad out a few extra minutes of playtime. That's not to say the puzzles are necessarily bad, however, they're not nearly as good as they were in the first game. Unfortunately, the puzzles in Hellblade 2 just don't really hit the same way they did in the first game. Moving past the puzzles, let me move on to the story itself. Overall, I'd say the story in Hellblade 2 is pretty solid. It's by no means the worst story I've ever experienced, but it also isn't on some Red Dead Redemption 2 or The Last of Us level. Since they did decide to do a sequel for Hellblade, I think the route they took for the story in Hellblade 2 makes sense and was probably the best route to take based off of where we left off in the first game. Again, the story isn't something I absolutely adored, however, it wasn't bad by any means. If you're looking for a story-driven game, Hellblade 2 offers a pretty compelling story, and I ended the story feeling pretty accomplished rather than disappointed, which is always a good thing when it comes to the story of any game. Moving on from the story, let me touch on performance a little. Overall performance in Hellblade 2 is pretty good, honestly. Most of the time, we see a ton of issues with bigger game releases, and surprisingly, I didn't really have any issue with Hellblade 2, which is honestly kind of crazy that I have to be shocked about a game performing pretty well, but it's 2024. What else can we expect from big game releases now? Occasionally, I would get some FPS drops, but they never lasted for very long. I never crashed, never experienced any weird bugs or anything along those lines. I do have a pretty beefy PC, however, I also just haven't been seeing many people saying anything bad about the performance of the game, which is always a good sign. Finally, I wanted to talk about the overall length of the game. I do want to say that my playtime might be a little longer than the average player because most people aren't trying to 100% complete games. However, I was seeing some people or creators claiming to have beaten the game after about 5 hours. hours. I simply don't understand how this is even really possible. I can understand maybe 6 hours if you're trying to speedrun the game, however 5 hours seems almost impossible based off of my experience. I personally 100% completed the game in just under 8 hours. This easily could have taken longer because I had missed a couple of collectibles during my playthrough, however there is a chapter selection so I was able to go back and pick up the ones I missed. For the average player who isn't trying to 100% the game, I can say it'll probably take you around 6 to 7 hours to finish. If you're trying to 100% the game, I'd say it's safe to assume it'll take around 7 to 9 hours. Overall, Hellblade 2 is a solid sequel to the first game, however it's not very groundbreaking or does a whole lot to make it stand out very much among the sea of other story-driven games. If you're looking for a good, short story-driven game with a dark and gritty tone, then I think you'd really enjoy Hellblade 2. Full price, Hellblade 2 is $50, however it is also on Xbox Game Pass. Do I recommend buying the game at full price? I think it all comes down to how much of a fan you are of the Hellblade series. If you're just interested in it but not a massive fan of the series, I'd recommend either playing it on Xbox Game Pass or waiting for a sale, mainly because of the lack of actual gameplay you really get for $50. Personally, I really enjoyed Hellblade 2 and would recommend it to anyone interested as long as it was either on a sale or if you're planning on playing through Xbox Game Pass. I'm interested to know your thoughts. Have you played or plan to play Hellblade 2? If so, what do you think of the game? Are you happy with it or were you left wishing for more? Let me know down in the comments, and if you like anything and everything about gaming, you should subscribe so that way you never miss a video.